Back in January 2006, I was working as a commercial manager at a local newspaper in Lima, Peru. After almost a year in a rented office, the director and partner of the newspaper announced that soon we would be moving to a new location in downtown, to an old area of the city. This area was known for decades for being a hotspot for paranormal phenomena and ghost sightings, with ruined properties and abandoned houses. Even the old city prison was located a few blocks away until it was demolished in the 1920s. A great deal of stories and folklore around this area were told by older people. In the 70s, a famous TV show host back then made a public challenge and stayed in a nearby haunted, abandoned house all night. And rumor has it that he retired after that experience, lost his mind, and ended in a mental facility. The negotiations for buying the new office were going very smoothly, but unexpectedly, the owner was diagnosed with terminal cancer. After receiving these sad news, his mind was set on selling all his properties before passing away, so he could leave his soon-to-be widow not having to deal with transfers and legal issues. His idea was to liquidate all his assets and leave his wife with a full cash bank account and, well, no headaches. But suddenly, in the middle of the transaction, the owner sadly passed away, without fully completing the operation, but with a down payment and papers in notary already signed. We were informed that the deal was finally closed, the papers signed, all paid and in order, and soon after we started plans for moving to the new office. So we moved in. The office was located on the first floor of a 10-story building, constructed in the early 1940s, and was considered at the time to be a beautiful architectural piece. This mixed concept of offices in the first floor levels and apartment complexes in the upper floors was revolutionary at its time. The building had 3 street fronts. Our office entrance for the public was located on the left side street of the building, and the parking garage ramp on the right side street of the building. The front side faced a 2-way wide avenue. The parking garage, which had space for almost 15 cars, was 1 level below the street and had a T-shape, being the I from the T, the access ramp. So if you went down, you were only able to turn left or right. Also, there was no fancy remote control system. The parking entrance gate was a double wooden door that had to be opened manually from the outside. So every time you needed access or to leave the parking garage, the security guard from the newspaper office had to run out the street making 2 left turns in order to open the door from the outside. At that time, the parking garage was pitch black. As most tenants refused to pay building maintenance fees, there were no replacement lamps. The only lights were either from the car's headlights when entering or leaving the building, or the natural sunlight coming through once the garage's doors were opened. In other words, you had to walk to your car in complete darkness and wait for the guard to open the double door up the ramp. One important feature of this underground parking garage was that the only access to the building's first level once one parked was through an individual small door from which one would go up a spiral metal staircase up to the first floor, exiting towards a small hall where the restrooms were also located. As for the office layout, it basically had 2 levels and a basement. The basement is like a second garage we used as a deposit. The first floor was basically an open space, and the main public access from the lobby to the main desk was divided by a very thick and heavy glass and an aluminum-framed double door. Usually one side remained closed, and the other one permanently open inwards approximately 90 degrees. The first floor was in full renovation in those days, so a couple of meters away from the entrance was a wide counter under construction, and behind it the pool of computers from the press room, crowded with many reporters and graphic designers. In the back area were the restrooms, a small kitchenette, and the entrance to go down the spiral metal staircase to the basement next to the parking garage. To the far left side entering from the street was the main staircase to the second floor. It was a long one-way staircase that led straight up. The second level was an open space too, originally with a side-to-side balcony looking down the first floor, but wooden panels were placed there due to renovations, as space for private offices was needed. The only existing office at the second floor was at the back, left-hand side, and a bathroom in front of it that was not renovated and kept in its original form. 2 more offices were soon added to the right-hand side of this floor. We officially moved in, and for the first months dealt with construction workers, electricians, and network installers. Also, the spiral metal staircase that led up from the deposit and parking garage went through full renovation, as it was rusted and somewhat hazardous to use. The 2 second-floor new offices were built with wooden panels and temporarily without doors, as they were planned to be installed later. The first incidents we experienced were mostly electrical malfunctions, but we all rubbed it off as we thought were the result of the new cables and connections. But things were about to change. Fred, the newspaper director, usually worked late in order to close the daily edition. He usually came to the office in the afternoon. I, on the other hand, was the opposite, starting work at 9 a.m. and leaving around 5:30 in the afternoon. For this reason, it was common for me to hear Fred losing his patience, screaming and cursing at his assistant about having problems with lights and electric connections that malfunctioned constantly. He started complaining about finding the TV in his office turned on, which was strange considering that he always left it locked. Fred started getting particularly worried about the possibility that somebody could be sneaking in, since he usually had sensitive documents regarding some investigation or case inside his office, so he started being very careful, even changing the locks and having all the sets of keys with him. Nevertheless, he continued to find his TV on, and sometimes the volume level raised without him touching the remote controller. We were not concerned at first, as I said before. We were positive it had to be a problem with the new cables and connections, and frankly, the idea of something paranormal didn't even cross our minds. That is until one day, when a welder that was working on the spiral metal staircase in the basement suddenly abandoned his tools and disappeared. As days went by, we decided to send the director assistant to look for the welder at his shop to ask him when he was planning to return to work and finish the job. The welder asked the assistant for his tools and welding machine to be returned to his shop and told him he was not coming back to work, and he also said he didn't want any payment. When the director heard about this, he was puzzled about the welder's reaction and called him on the phone to ask what the problem was for not coming back to finish the spiral metal staircase renovation. The welder told the director that a few days before, when he was working on the basement alone, he suddenly, from the corner of his eye, noticed a dark figure standing beside him, so he turned quickly and raised his visor, but no one was there. At first, he had thought that the visor from his helmet was dirty, so he continued working. The next day, once again he had this feeling that someone was standing beside him, but no one was there. A couple of days went on, and he started to actually become a bit paranoid, but continued his work regardless, this time welding metal from the spiral staircase. Suddenly, in front of him, a silhouette materialized amidst the dense smoke produced by the welding. He kept looking for almost a minute, trying to understand what he was looking at, and after raising his visor up once again, he could clearly see a human figure 2 meters away from him. He was instantly frozen, and his only reaction was to run up the stairs, leaving the office without taking his tools or the welding machine with him. He was in such hurry to leave that he did so without even telling anyone about the incident. Word spread rapidly among the staff, and rumors that the ghost of the recently deceased building owner was grieving in the office. Some of the people that worked in the building started to feel a bit concerned, while others just laughed it off and took the whole thing as a joke. Soon, ghost stories and paranoia started to make their way around and became a common conversation topic for the next few days, but eventually, almost everyone forgot about it, and it slowly faded away. A couple of weeks went by without incident until one afternoon, a loud banging noise coming from the basement alerted the reporters that were working on the first floor. A loud sound, like a very heavy piece of furniture tilting and falling on the floor. At that time, the basement had no furniture, only a table and some shelves to store old newspapers and past editions that were secured firmly against the wall. One reporter went halfway down the spiral metal staircase that was still in the middle of renovation and looked around, but all was in place. Nothing on the floor and all eerily silent. In the following couple of days, the loud banging sounds coming from the storage basement repeated at least twice with no explanation. The overnight shift guard also complained about hearing weird sounds coming from the second floor, which he described started as a noise similar to someone moving desks or dragging chairs, but in the next days had become more like loud bangs, and progressively with the passing of the week like somebody was kicking doors furiously, yet no marks were found on any doors. The guard, afraid of these events, resigned his post, so Fred asked the janitor if he could stay the night and get paid some extra cash, giving him time to find a replacement guard, since the office was filled with computers and expensive equipment, but located in a dangerous neighborhood. The janitor gladly accepted to spend the night at the office, from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. alone. Also, it's important to highlight that the janitor asked the guards to lock him from the outside before their shifts ended in order to protect himself and the equipment from thieves. He didn't mind not being able to leave the building for 3 or 4 hours. I might need to explain here that a newspaper usually works in 2 shifts. The first one being during the day for administrative, legal, commercial, and accountant. The second shift by night is for reporters that close the daily edition at midnight. For the most part, the ones that worked during the day didn't have the chance to talk with the ones that worked at night, so each shift had their own stories, but it was difficult to get the whole picture of what was happening, because there was no communication between them and nobody was putting them together. Anyways, back to the janitor. It was not long after that the janitor had his own encounter with the ghost, and this time it would be a traumatic face-to-face experience. As he explained after the incident, it was around 3 a.m. in the morning and he was sitting at a computer on the first floor, watching videos. Suddenly, from the straight staircase that led to the second floor, a dark figure he described like a shadow started walking down slowly. The figure walked down the stairs but did not reach the first floor. Instead, remained standing in the second-to-last step, only staring quietly. Then, turned around and began slowly walking back up again in silence towards the darkness of the second floor, until it was out of sight. The janitor's immediate reaction was to call hysterically the day shift guard's phone, who was supposed to start his shift early that morning. The janitor panicked and crying, begging him to come to the office right away and unlock the doors so he could leave the building. When the day guard arrived an hour later, he tried to calm the poor janitor who was pale and shaking. I actually had the opportunity to talk to the janitor hours after the event. I asked him about the dark figure, things like if he could recall any details about its face or clothing, if any. All he could say was, "No face, only a shadow," so I insisted, "It's not possible, it has to have had some sort of feature. He was in front of you and the lights were on." But he kept on mumbling, "Can't explain, no face, only a dark figure." The janitor also resigned his job, and as I was told a few days later, he traveled to his hometown in the northern part of the country to seek a shaman to perform a spiritual cleanse to get rid of the spirit that had haunted him. A few weeks later, Fred was parking his car down in the garage, but when he turned off the engine, he was unable to open the car's doors, so he tried to start the engine back again, but that failed as well. He tried to lower the windows, but the car electric system was dead. He was literally locked inside his own vehicle, if that's even possible. He started freaking out and called his assistant on the phone several times to come down and help him out. Unfortunately, the reception in the basement was really bad, and the phone signal was very poor. Only after several tries was he able to reach his assistant and asked him to come down quickly and help him out of his car. It took several minutes for the assistant to reach him, but when he arrived, the doors suddenly opened normally, and the engine started without problems. After this malfunction, Fred decided to bring a mechanic to check the car battery, but was unavailable until next morning. So he decided to leave his car parked inside the garage and asked his brother to lend him his SUV until his problem was solved. The next day I arrived to work. The guard opened the garage doors and I went down the ramp to park. I saw Fred's car and his brother's SUV parked one in front of the other, and a guy who I assumed was the mechanic next to Fred's assistant. They were manipulating some cables to connect both Fred's car and the SUV's batteries to start Fred's car. This is, after all, a usual procedure in these types of situations, but as they saw me parking and turning off my engine, the assistant approached and asked me if I could give the mechanic a ride to his shop, as now both cars were not working and needed to bring a fresh battery to start both Fred's car and the SUV. Both cars with their batteries drained. What are the odds of that happening to two cars simultaneously? Well, to my dismay, when I hopped in my car to give the mechanic a lift, well, my car's battery had died as well, and I could not turn the engine on. If two cars at the same time is extremely rare, 3 drained batteries at the same time seems impossible to me. Initially, I was a bit skeptic and did not pay much attention to the rumors. There had to be some sort of logical explanation, after all. I have never been one to believe in paranormal nonsense. But as weeks went by, I started to have some experiences of my own. The first one happened one morning when I was working at my office. I was on my desk and walked to the office next door, directly behind the right side of my wall, for less than a minute. When I returned to my desk, I noticed the lights of my office were off, and as I approached my computer, I noticed it was also turned off. I restarted the system, and it turned on without any problem. I thought maybe it had been an issue with the electric installation as they were still new, but that still seemed a bit odd since we hadn't had any problems of that kind for weeks. I then went on to the light switch, and when I checked, it was in the off position. No electrical failure can make a switch physically turn. It was as if somebody actually turned the switch down. I swear on my life to this day, I never touched that switch, and for sure not even accidentally. If I had wanted to make something up to scare people, I would have certainly chosen something more creative than that. It was impossible for the switch to be in that position, as it was located on the opposite side wall and nowhere near the door frame I had used to exit my office. Also, no other office had this problem, and since all of them were under the same line of connection, if mine failed, then others for sure would have too. I have to mention that, even though we were in the middle of the summer, with no air cooling system, the second floor was always freezing cold, unusually cold for the season. People that worked there were wearing jackets and sweatshirts in the middle of the summer, while the first floor was hot as hell. The second incident occurred a few days later when I was at the first floor, after lunch around noon. I was chatting with the front desk lady and her assistant. They both were at the other side of the counter at the public entrance, and I was standing between the street doors, the big heavy ones of thick glass and aluminum that I mentioned earlier. Suddenly, both of them looked up over my shoulder with a frightened expression on their faces. So immediately I thought, okay, here comes some bad guy with a big gun entering the office to take all our money and cell phones. To my surprise, as soon as I turned around, I heard a very loud bang, and then I realized what had happened. That big door, the one that was always open and swung 90 degrees inward, had shut violently without anyone moving it. The front desk lady and her assistant told me that the door was very heavy and that it was impossible for it to shut that way on its own. So we started considering different options and explanations of what had just happened. Maybe the wind. But the wind never blows from inside out. We even ran some tests on the door, pushing it harder and harder each time, but the door only moved a few inches each time before stopping. So it was clear that the door was shut closed by an invisible force that we couldn't perceive or understand. The following days, I was very paranoid. I ran out to my car after work, making sure the security guard was always near me, or I would avoid going to the bathroom until it was only necessary and urgent. I never imagined that going to relieve myself could be such a terrifying experience. The third incident I had, I think, was the creepiest of them all. I was leaving late that day. I usually avoided going home late because my office was located in a neighborhood that was a bit dangerous. And after getting dark, the streets changed and were a whole different story. Drunk people, thieves, prostitutes, you name it. I asked the security guard to go around and open the garage doors from the outside. In the meantime, I went down to the basement, down the spiral metal staircase, opened the interior door, and hopped very quickly into my car. I started the engine and immediately turned on my headlights, put reverse, and waited anxiously to see the bit of sunlight left at that time in the afternoon coming in through those opening doors and illuminating the ramp. While I was waiting for this, I remember seeing very clearly a person standing between the cars, just standing there doing nothing. My first thought was, who in their right mind would wash a car in this basement in the middle of the dark and without any lights? Then immediately I thought, but there's no water connection down here. And then suddenly, the lights illuminated the ramp, meaning the doors had been opened. I started moving, turned right, and started going up the ramp when suddenly I realized, oh shit. What did I just see? Who was that? It was impossible for someone to have been down in that parking garage at that time. I nearly never came across any people down there anyways, since very few cars were parked in that garage back in those days. I made an effort to remember the facial features of the man I had just seen, and even though he was 5 or 6 meters away from me and my headlights were pointing straight in his direction, I cannot for the life of me remember any feature. No face, no clothes. All I can recall is a shadowy, still, dark figure with no face. Once I was finally out, I rolled my window down and said goodbye to the guard. Then I told him to not lock the building yet, since there was someone else inside. He told me that everyone had clocked out and left already, and that I was the last one to leave. Days went by, and by that time, people were really started to freak out, as the activity had increased. Loud noises, furious banging, and kicking sounds were common every day. Some reporters didn't want to be left alone. Others refused to come to work, and now this situation was affecting the newspaper as a business. So one day, Fred said it was enough and decided it was time to bring some external help. A priest came to the office. Yes, a priest. I remember candles and smelling incense all over the place, and him walking up and down, praying in Latin, and spreading holy water in every corner. He also put some flowers for the spirit to elevate and leave the physical world, and follow the light to move forward onto heaven. Surprisingly, after those sessions, the activity reduced drastically. Only a few bangs and moving chairs and desks, but nothing very menacing. At this time, I left the newspaper and moved on to another job, but I kept in touch with Fred and other members of the staff who told me the activity reduced and finally disappeared over time. Years later, I met with a top member of the newspaper staff. He told me in confidence that he thought all these phenomena that we experienced for months had been aimed at the director. Fred, the one whose office lights would turn off, TV would turn on by itself, and got stuck inside his own car. He told me that after the building owner passed away, the widow complained to him, saying that the payment for purchasing the office was not fully honored, and that she told him that Fred had taken advantage of her and her husband's passing away for not paying the 100% of the price agreed. I also learned then that the building owner who passed away used this office frequently, and his studio was at the same spot than the one used by none other than Fred. Finally, he told me that the paranormal activity instantly ceased after Fred was forced to fully honor the payment, as the situation was getting out of control. This payment was made a few days after the priest came to the office and performed the ritual for the grieving deceased owner, who now had closure and could rest in peace knowing that his deathbed wishes to his wife were fully complied. Nothing paranormal has happened to me before this, and nothing paranormal has happened to me since. Like I said before, I have always been a skeptic person, and I always tend to find logical explanations for strange occurrences. But even to this day, roughly 17 years after these encounters, absolutely all the arrows seem to point towards a real encounter with a ghost. The main reason why I believe this to have been real is that many people had an experience of their own, and not necessarily people from the office who knew about the rumors, but also external people like the welder, the guard, and the janitor, none of whom had heard about any ghosts, so they had no reason to be expecting anything to happen or be paranoid. Another reason why I am positive this was an actual encounter is simply because it makes sense. The building owner passed away. Fred took advantage of the situation and kept money from the widow. Paranormal activity started occurring around the office. And almost every incident in which someone was messed with or attacked in a personal way, well, all of them involved Fred. And the fact that it all immediately stopped as soon as Fred made the last transaction and completed the payment is definitely no coincidence. So there you have it. My first-hand account about the paranormal events that occurred during my time working at the newspaper. Thanks for watching.
When night comes across the